Welcome to episode 2 of Tech Talk Thursday. My guests this week include Dave Trail from Critical Manufacturing, Bob Black from Isagi Systems, Tom Forsyth from Kaizen Corporation, and Ryan McCoy and Jane McCarthy from Absolute EMS. We've learned a lot of hard lessons in the past few weeks as we continue to educate ourselves about COVID-19 and how to prepare for the future pandemics and other disasters that may befall us in the future. There's no doubt about the manufacturing landscape we work in will be very different post-coronavirus. Shortly after World War II, my home country of the UK mandated that it would be illegal to allow our steel industry to be offshored. No matter what, we had to maintain a capacity to produce steel in case we were ever faced with another war and had to produce weapons, ships and planes at short notice. In today's environment, facing the hidden enemies, President Trump calls it, surely it must be the same for medical supplies and other critical support systems. One thing that has become abundantly clear in this pandemic is that every country put themselves first. So those relying on a just-in-time global supply chain were caught short. As much as 95% of access to the world's rare earth metals is controlled by China. 85% of the world's PCBs and many other components come from the same single source. Governments need to seriously address this imbalance and create the conditions for a more homogeneous spread of the risk across, at the very least, regional geographies, and in some cases within each nation itself. And now, let's start with this week's program. My first guest today is Dave Trail. He is VP of Electronics at Critical Manufacturing, and he's coming to us from Hawaii. Nice to see you, Dave.
Thanks, Trevor. Nice to see you too.
Okay, so tell me, one of the things we want to talk about today is dark data.
Sure.
For those of us who don't understand it, explain to our viewers what is dark data.
Sure. You know, over the last few years, we've all heard the phrase "data is the new oil." And most of us, have a basic understanding of what that means. But there's also a claim that data is only valuable if it's refined. Okay, and refining this data is where the value is created. But that's not necessarily true in some regards. Obviously what we're seeing in the industry right now, we're seeing a technical revolution. Some call it Industry 4.0, Internet of Things, big data, AI. And there's a proliferation of solutions that are facilitating this revolution. And at the heart of that is data. Now, the problem that we're having is, there's more and more IoT devices or sensors that are coming on the market, which makes gathering data relatively easy and relatively inexpensive and growing less expensive day by day. The problem is we're gathering all of this data without necessarily knowing exactly what to do with it or how to store it. So we've been working on several technologies over the last several months or so on a way that we can make some of this dark data. And what I mean by dark data is data that is included in the information that we're storing that wouldn't necessarily present itself on the surface as being important data.
Raw data, essentially.
Yeah, raw data, exactly. And an interesting statistic on that is of the data that we're collecting, filling up all of our servers and all of our systems right now, 90% of the data that we're collecting is raw data.
Right.
Okay, so we're collecting all of this because we've been told that we're supposed to, but not a lot of people know exactly why. And that's not entirely a bad thing, because
the thinking is that we don't know what we're going to need tomorrow. I mean, 5 years down the pipe, you might need that data. It's stuck away there, it's buried away there somewhere. But you have a batch of recalls. You're trying to understand why this happened, and it's probably good practice just not to throw it away.
Well, yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, there's really two reasons why you keep the data. You minimize risks and liabilities for compliance reasons or litigation or, something that might jeopardize the business down the line. And also, like you said, to safeguard the future possibility of using this data for useful insights for your business. You can't just invent historical data. It has to be gathered over time. And the problem is all of this data is building up in everybody's servers because we're processing it too soon, because that's what we've been told we're supposed to do.
Ah, interesting. So you think we're processing it too soon? I always thought the problem was that the bottleneck was trying to interpret the data to make sense of it and make actionable decisions from that. But you think we're processing it too soon. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is, if you talk with a lot of the other companies in our industry that talk about data collection and storing information and generating reports and those types of things, one of the first things that they'll tell you is to make data useful, you need to be able to contextualize it and add reference information to that data as you're collecting it. The problem with doing that is, as you start contextualizing and adding reference data to this raw data that you're collecting, it creates a storage issue because it grows the size of the data and makes it more difficult to, quote unquote, be packed within the storage system that you have available, which is one of the reasons why storage of data is, when I start talking to IT departments, they start asking me about server requirements and things like that, because everybody does understand that while the price of servers and storage is going down, it's still not cheap.
Right, right. So what is your solution to this? I mean, what is critical manufacturing doing to try and address this problem?
Sure. As I mentioned, we're in the midst of this technical revolution, but, one interesting aspect of things is, in all other technical revolutions, Industry 2.0, Industry 3.0, et cetera, manufacturing took the lead on a lot of this. Okay. However, what we're seeing now is there's other industries that are way ahead of us on utilizing all of the data and making it useful. Companies that are in insurance, advertising, financial services, social media, they're way ahead of us on this, and we're really lagging behind. And so what we've done is we've taken a look at some of the storage methods that companies like LinkedIn and Facebook and those other companies that bring in a tremendous amount of data that is raw data that they need to make use of and make sense of at a later date. And how do they store all of that and make all of that data useful to operate their systems? Right. So that's what we've been working on, is using technologies such as Apache Kafka and other streaming technologies to be able to utilize the data in a fashion that we can add value to it while still being able to store it in an efficient manner.
Right, right. That's really interesting. But I mean, they're of course working in a consumer environment, and in the manufacturing world, we tend to be very risk averse.
Sure.
So, that it's possibly one of the reasons that we lag behind, I think, in adopting some of these systems. But we live in a different world now. I mean, we're in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic. I'm sure coming out the other end of this, Dave, we're going to be in a very different world. And companies are not only going to be spreading the risk geographically, but they're going to be presumably bringing in an element of more automation, partly to reduce the labor costs and things like that, but also to increase efficiency.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree 100%. I mean, we've seen a rapid change in how we do business. Even before all of this current situation was seen. And now you and I are doing videos from Zoom. It's become a regular part of doing business these days. I think a lot of that is going to carry over into the way we do business once all of this is done and it's behind us. And what we're going to see is some of the same pressures that we were seeing before, such as being able to lower costs, improve efficiencies, and things like that. But it's going to have to happen at an accelerated rate. Okay, because competition it's not going to slow down ever. Competition is competition. It just gets tougher and tougher. So being able to utilize the data that's generated on the manufacturing floor and to be able to put it into actionable intelligence is something that companies are going to have to do. It's not going to be something that they're going to think would be great to do someday. It's going to be a requirement. And utilizing some of the more advanced storage technologies that we've been looking at is really the way that we believe companies are going to be able to be competitive in this very, very difficult environment.
Yeah, definitely. No, I mean, I honestly think that was a problem that was starting actually before we ever got near this coronavirus, and that was the fact that NPIs were coming in much faster. The introduction of new products was the introduction time was getting narrower and narrower all the time. So that was definitely an issue, but I think it's going to be a bigger issue coming out the other side of this. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, over the last several years, we've seen things grow from high volume mass production environments to mass customization, meaning that people want to order a product that is unique to them. My wife, before all of this started, ordered a set of headsets for traveling on an airplane, and she wanted hers to be a specific color with these specific features on it, but she didn't want to pay any more or have it take any less or any more time. And those are the types of things that we're doing. Simple things like ordering a vehicle. A lot of people don't go to a vehicle parking lot anymore. They shop for it online, and as they're configuring their vehicle, that data is being sent directly to the automotive manufacturing plant to create the specific vehicle that person ordered.
Right.
And we're gonna see the same thing within our industry, which is, it does encompass part of the automotive industry, but we're gonna see that in electronics as a whole.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that. Dave, it's a fascinating world we live in. I want to thank you for joining us today. Stay safe there in Hawaii. I look forward to catching up with you sometime in the next few months, I hope.
Sounds good, Trevor. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. So my next guest today is Bob Black, better known for being, of course, president of Juki for many years, and now heading up the efforts for Isegi Automation in the United States. Welcome, Bob. Great to see you again.
Hi, Trevor. How you doing? How you holding up?
Holding up well. It's been a month in lockdown so far, but we're getting used to it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm entering my 6th week.
Wow. Yeah, it's certainly taken an adjustment to get used to it, but there we go.
Yeah.
But it gives us a time to look at our business practices and look at our businesses and how they operate. How is the landscape for storage towers, which have become such a phenomenon in factories recently?
Yeah, I think it's very good, and it's unfortunate this tragic pandemic and so many people sick and losing their lives. But I think one thing it's done, and in Europe now we see the start of it in Germany starting to come out and think about the future and not just the mess we're in today. Right. Companies are starting to address that. I think automation is a big part of that. It was on the way with Industry 4.0, but I think today they realize that anything that saves people and enables you to run your business with more efficiently is something that's going to be more popular in the future. And I think storage towers definitely fit in that category.
Right. You've got a webinar actually coming up in about a week's time where you're going to be talking about how storage systems are going to be developing in the coming weeks and months. Can you give us a potted version of how you see it rolling out, how you see them changing?
Yeah, I think that the trend we've seen since the beginning of storage systems, and that's about 10 years now, since the first automated storage tower was made by Reutel in Munich, it has been two things: an increase of density, that is more components in less floor space, and a reduction in cost per reel or tray stored. This has been a dramatic progress over the last 10 years from a fairly expensive per reel cost, and we've cut at least 60% off that just in the first 10 years. And I think in the next 5 or 10 years, we'll even do more than that. So I think increased density, increased quantity of components, probably the speed in which the component kits are pulled will improve, and the cost will be further reduced.
Right. So just to be clear, when you say density of components, you're not talking about increasing the footprint of the storage systems, but increasing the density of components stored within these systems.
That's correct. Eliminating wasted space, and you know, if you look at the first Esmann tower, that was more popular, the 2000 model. The 3600 model holds, you know, almost 80% more components, and it's a quarter of a square meter less than the 2000 was in floor space. So I think that trend is going to continue.
Mm-hmm. What about the incorporating some of these X-ray systems or the component counters within?
Yeah, that's of great interest. And we showed, I don't know if you had a chance to get around because you're usually so busy at Productronica, but we showed actually a optical control, now Nordson system, physically integrated with a storage tower cluster.
Right.
And we're also working with others. We're working with VJ now. They've come with an inline version, and we're now working on the integration for that as well. You know, we don't intend to sell X-ray counters. We tend to be neutral and sell the hookup to our system. But how that works is if you have a group of towers and expansion modules together, we have a unit called the MIM, the Machine Interface Module. And that is like a half a storage tower. It'll hold another 1,400 components, but it also acts as a handler to prepare components to exit the tower and to come in automatically. And so that'll work with an X-ray counter. It'll feed the component in right in the tray, or components in the tray, if it may be more than one. The X-ray counter will close its doors, count it, open it up, shove it back to us. We'll take it back into the tower and then feed the next one. So it basically replaces manually putting the units in. And that same MIM unit will act as loaders for AGVs or AIVs that come up, and we'll transfer the components to those, and then they'll leave and they can bring us components. We'll take the components from them. So that MIM can do two different functions: act as a handler for automated transport and act as a loader and unloader for the X-ray counters. So if you see, you know, let's say you're running a 2-shift operation and you've got 5 hours of dead time in the middle of the wee hours of the morning, you could give a list of cycle counts that you want done, and during the downtime, the towers will automatically pull those components and have them cycle counted. You'll have the results already in your figures when you come in the morning. So it has an interesting potential for a lot of customers.
Right. Yeah, it's certainly helping add a lot of automation to the process. You know, with the current after effects of the coronavirus, companies are to mitigate the risk that they've been exposed to recently by moving manufacturing more regional rather than having it centrally based in one place. Do you think the storage towers and the automation is going to really ramp up as these companies start to relocate to areas that are probably going to be a little bit more expensive to manufacture in, but maybe they can compensate with, you know, greater automation?
Well, I think, yes, definitely what we've seen during this pandemic is you can't rely on having your supply chain too far away, especially if it's medical equipment or pharmaceuticals. So I think you're going to see a trend in Europe and also in the US of definitely more domestic manufacture. And of course, to make that efficient, they're going to want to automate. So I've, the last couple of weeks, I've been talking to some of our customers across the U.S. and Canada to ask how they're operating during this and going forward. And I plan to do an article soon about that. But one thing that the trend has been sure, the customers for the SG towers have been able to continue to run at a pretty high level of production with only 1 or 2 people pulling the kits because the towers are doing most of the work. And that's big advantage than having 5 or 6 people running around in a stock room, trying to stay 6 feet away from each other while they're pulling components. So I think, it's been a tragic circumstance, and I certainly don't want to look like we're trying to profit off other people's misery. But, automation, I think, in all phases is going to get a good hard look after this, because people realize that if an epidemic like this comes along, it's hard to keep your factory full of people without putting them at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a game changer all around, I think. Bob, it's always great to get your insight. I want to thank you for sharing that with us today and joining us. And I want you to stay safe, my friend. And we look forward to catching up with you when we all get back to the trade shows.
Well, I'll do my best, Trevor, and you stay safe too. And hopefully things are improving in England. They're starting to in some areas of the U.S. So yeah, hopefully in a couple of months we'll be able to look back on this and with a sigh of relief.
Well, I certainly hope so. Anyway, thank you, and we'll catch up with you sometime soon.
Okay, take care.
Joining me today is from Kaizen Corporation. Kaizen's one of these organizations that's global in nature, and they certainly got an early warning sign about what was coming down the pipe with coronavirus. So welcome, Tom. Nice to see you today.
Good to see you, Trevor.
Yeah. So let's give us a quick recap on what were the first signs that you saw something was up with your Chinese factory.
Well, it's with our team, right? So we have a strong team in China that's scattered around. I guess fortunately we didn't have any staff in the Wuhan area on a permanent basis, but we, because of that, we try to stay up on the news, and the news was pretty dire, pretty early on. Even rolling into Chinese New Year, we were pretty well convinced that things were going to be different after Chinese New Year, and so we took steps. We've been doing a lot of work on our supply lines since the prior summer, mostly in response to tariffs and trade wars and those other things that seem so long ago and far away. Mm-hmm. And so those were sort of coming into bloom about the same time, and we accelerated a few things to get product in the right places, both into and out of China, because sort of depending upon what was going on. And we were fortunate to do that. I think it wound up helping us a great deal.
Right. Well, certainly China had a bit of an economic break with the fact that it was the Chinese New Year, because most factories had already factored in the fact that we're going to be closed for a couple of weeks.
I think so. I think that was fortuitous for the global supply chain thing, because everyone around the world, much like in the Western world, people know you kind of need more inventory before Christmas and after Christmas and that kind of thing. These seasonal imbalances are well understood, right? So people plan for them well. Of course, we remember years ago, Chinese New Year lasted a lot longer than it does now.
Right.
And so, but there's an awful lot of inventory buildup leading up to Chinese New Year in various parts of the supply chain, and I think that was kind of a lucky break. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, what specifically, having found out that this was going down, what lessons did you learn from it, and how did you roll that out to the work around?
Well, our first approach, we're kind of simple in a lot of ways, and our first step was we had to keep our team safe. And part of course, it was Chinese New Year, right? So people mostly were out of the office, but it was important that they exercise safe behaviors there. So we strongly encourage them to be safe. A lot of our folks did not go home. Many people travel home for the Chinese New Year holiday to be with close family that live far away. And we encouraged folks to do what they thought was best. But maybe this wasn't the greatest year to travel, so there was a mix there. Quite a number of people stayed local instead of going home. And then they just stayed very safe when they were there. We tried to make sure people had masks, tried to help them, make sure they weren't worried about financial issues. And some people, even as things started to come back together, some people were still stuck because, of course, domestic travel in China was interrupted. And now, as we look back, that was a pretty wise move. That keeping these little individual petri dishes of different cities and towns and families, as you isolate it and let the virus burn itself out, well, then you're okay. If you're constantly mixing and churning, it's harder to get to okay.
Right. So, I mean, it's kind of worked its way through China for the most part. And it's now traversing through the rest of the world. How do you think economically this is going to affect us?
Well, it's first off, I don't think many people are going to miss some bruises. All right. But this is very unusual in that, parts of the economy can't keep up. The food processing folks, that industry, which was kind of unknown to me, but of course, once they explained it, it kind of made sense. The food industry had evolved into the eat-at-home food industry and the eat-out food industry, and they were similar, but apparently very parallel tracks, right? That didn't really intersect a whole lot.
Right.
So repurposing that stuff has been more challenging. But you look at the groceries and those kinds of folks that are struggling to keep up. In a normal economy pullback, those are folks that are not, they're not stressed like this. They're experiencing a similar thing. So I think there's going to be winners and losers. But I think the fact that because so many pieces of the economies are still functioning, obviously not travel and tourism, which
right.
is pretty much at zero.
Mm-hmm.
But other giant chunks of the economy are actually okay, and I think that's going to help spin the wheel. And I also think that because people, in large part, have embraced the social distancing and the remain in place, there's a lot of different buzzwords around the world.
Let's take a close look at the electronics industry in particular. I mean, the high rel stuff like medical electronics, of course, is booming, and military hasn't really been affected. So
Right.
The high reliability stuff for the biggest part has not been affected. But what about other sectors like automotive and other consumer goods? How do you think that's going to?
Well, I think automotive and consumer goods are similar, but a little bit different. In that the automotive guys were already in a bit of a patch. Because sales were off. Sales have been off in China for some time, for like the last 2 years, I think.
Yeah.
They've been slowing down in Europe as well as here. Obviously, different factors driving that in certain markets, and cars are now mostly electronic devices with tires underneath them, and so their benefit, they're good. Unlike 10 or 20 years ago, where the car business wasn't really that big a driver of the electronics industry. That's significantly changed. Now, I think consumer electronics is a little bit different because, I believe I was just looking at some statistics this morning, and that, many pockets in retail sales are way, way off, 20, 30, 40%, like apparel is off like 50%. through, I guess that was March, probably March data. And so, when we look at the electronic side, I think it's kind of a mixed bag. People that are stuck at home, my guess is the people selling monitors had a good month. Right. Because everybody's used to working in their office with 2 or 12 monitors, right? Some people have a whole wall full of the darn things. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure people that have become accustomed to that know how to function without them. So I think it's going to be a mixed bag, but I thought it was very telling to see Apple's announcement about a new, smaller, lower price point phone.
Well, that was needed, wasn't it? I mean, they more or less priced themselves out of the market for a lot of consumers.
Right. So, but the timing of that in particular was, they're more known for, most new products come out in September, don't they? It's kind of like the old new cars when we were kids. They came out in early September. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was very interesting that they and they're good at strategy, right? They're smart folks that are there. So I view that as Apple decided that they needed to change the conversation here in the middle of the pandemic. So again, I think consumer electronics is likely to take some lumps from my perspective over the next quarter or so. And it really depends on what happens to all these the poor folks that are unemployed. The numbers in the U.S. are staggering, 22 million in the last 5 or 6 weeks. And that doesn't count the people where the state's websites have. So that means, in 2 days, this Thursday, chances are it's going to be another staggering number. If the payroll protection plan that the U.S. government has put in place accomplishes its goal, that number may be dropped dramatically within 30 days.
Yeah, there's huge problems there trying to administer that, but I hear what you're saying.
Lots of people have the money now. They ran out of money, but they've distributed an awful lot of money.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I don't know that any government in the world has ever handed out hundreds of billions of dollars that they decided to do yesterday and was finished in 3 weeks' time.
It's a strange phenomenon, the US dollar, isn't it? You just print more of it. I don't quite know how that works, but anyway, we're running out a little bit of time, Tom. So
I can only agree with you there for sure.
Yeah. So just finally, on takeaways after this pandemic is over, how do you think the world is going to change in terms of manufacturing, our approach to China, regionalization of manufacturing, etc.? How do you think things are going to change in that respect?
I think people are going to be taking very, very strong looks at their supply chains and their distribution channels and saying, do we have redundancy? I think in some ways we have, in our seeking ever greater efficiencies, we have genuinely reaped those rewards because efficiencies bring rewards. They bring more profits.
Right.
But I think we've overlooked the risk factors that some of those efficiencies have cost us.
And these efficiencies aren't as strong as they used to be. I mean, because this whole thing started on the low labor aspect, which has changed considerably, and automation is driving down the requirement for even more.
Oh, I agree, and so, but I think what you've seen in China is a bit more of the network effect. Years ago, remember when eBay was a really big new concept, right? How long ago that was? Probably 6 months, right? Part of eBay's success was that, well, everybody else was already on there.
Right.
Okay. Kind of like what Facebook is experiencing these days. Mm-hmm. And China had kind of the same thing. Well, gee, because the supply chains that were never in China, let's face it, 35 years ago, there wasn't a single supply chain in China. Okay. Right. That migrated there. I was like, well, gee, everything there was kind of new because it didn't exist 30 years ago. Everything was there. It was convenient. It was easy. Well, that's true. But in those days, of course, it was costly to build that infrastructure. But the payoff was those lower labor rates. Right. And you're right. The labor rates are still lower than in many Western countries, but they are far from the lowest in the world anymore. And I believe that people are going to look at those investments that it will take to expand the global supply chain feeder sources, the kind of the headwaters, if you will, of the supply chains.
Right.
And they're going to go, this is just like buying insurance. Insurance is money you spend every year, and you really hope it doesn't pay off because you don't want to have an insurance claim.
Well, that's exactly what it is. They need to improve their insurance by mitigating the risk globally by, I think.
And I believe we will see that now. I don't believe it will be headlines on the newspapers.
Right.
And I'm not even sure it will cause a consequential retrench in China because China is a market of 1 billion people. There's lots of demand there.
No, the wealth is growing there all the time. So I mean, their indigenous market and the value of that is rising. So
that's right. So I think what you're going to see is China over time will be less export driven, and at least on the raw material side, maybe not. The different places in the food chain, and I think you will start to see outside of East Asia. Countries decide that in some cases for strategic reasons, we're going to have X percentage of, like, for example, I'm quite certain that the U.S. is never going to experience a shortage of face masks and medical gowns ever again. And that's not going to be free. But I'm also convinced it's going to be true, which means someone somewhere, within the lower 48 probably is going to be making those things, and I'm sure other pockets of things will be that way. But I believe everybody's going to look at their supply chains and view it in that insurance realm that says, "Gee, I can't save $1 if I do it all here, but if a bad thing happens again, I'm really at risk."
True. We all get sucked into the Japanese just-in-time routine, and unfortunately, it caught us out.
I agree. And you know what? I think just-in-time is a wonderful concept for consumer electronics, because really bad things happen. Frankly, consumer electronics are largely elective devices that the world can go on without them. For things that the world can't go on, particularly medical and safety and those sorts of things, where when times are tough is when you need that stuff more.
Right.
I think a different analytical technique is going to be embraced broadly.
Yeah. Tom, it's great to get your insight as always. You're a very experienced world traveler, and it'll be great to see you back on the road again soon. But for now, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Trevor, and thank you. You stay safe as well. Let's all be smart and stay safe while we hunker down. So after Q2, we can all have a booming Q3.
Let's hope so. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trevor.
At Kaizen, we know it's the science that makes the difference. The right solutions happen when you care enough to ask the right questions. And we understand that your performance is directly related to ours. Science knows why it works, care knows why it's important.
Welcome back. We're joined now by Tier 3 contract manufacturer in the Valley called Absolute EMS. And I'm pleased to be joined by Ryan McCoy, who's the purchasing manager, and Jane Carthy, who's the VP of Sales and Marketing. Nice to see you folks. Thanks for joining us.
It's nice to see you, Trevor. Thank you.
Okay, so you're pretty busy at the moment because essentially you're right at the forefront of this critical medical equipment manufacturing. Can you tell us exactly what kind of products you're making at the moment?
The history of our organization is our roots are in the medical industry. So we have a lot of medical customers to begin with, and they are very much so on the forefront of helping with the virus. So what we are assisting with is instrumentation and medical products that is being brought to the forefront to diagnose, determine, test this particular virus. So we are classified as an essential business.
Okay, so you're doing the testing kits for antibodies and that type of thing.
We're working on testing kits, and we are onboarding customers that need help with ventilator manufacturing.
Right. Okay. So you're also involved in that. Ryan, can I ask you? Are you having any issues with supply chain issues, trying to source critical parts that you might need for this?
So we are seeing some disruptions within the supply chain, but the way our business model is set up, we have several source items, and our customers have been pretty good at approving alternates for us to use. So we're able to mitigate some of the issues that we are seeing with components that aren't available in the market at the time.
Right. Okay. Now, as I said at the beginning of the segment, you're a tier 3 manufacturer, but you actually say on your website you can scale. You have the ability to really scale. What do you mean by that, Jane?
We have put in place a magnificent 4.0 facility, and it has very, very high-speed equipment. We have employees who have been here many years, and we can take customers' products from the quantities of 1 or 2, and of course, depending on complexity. I say this with full respect, but we have several customers where we run in the hundreds of thousands a month, and that is not unusual for us. And so we also work very well with miniaturization and the types of products that other people can't manufacture. So we're here to support and take it as far as it can go with the Made in America.
Right, excellent. So that's a good point you make. I do believe you've invested quite a bit recently in updating a lot of the equipment in the factory. Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about what recent changes you've made in that respect?
Yes, so we have a new SMT line. It's a hand wall line, state-of-the-art line that allows for full automation of the factory, allows our equipment in the beginning that tests solder paste inspection all the way through to our AOI flying probe. It's all connected, and those systems will allow each other to speak with one another. We also have a new X-ray equipment. It's full 3D X-ray Dage machine. And we also have a state-of-the-art SRT, which is basically used for BGA rework and fine pitch type items.
Right. Wow, you've been busy. So guys, I mean, we're working in really strange times right now. I mean, it's very difficult manufacturing environment apart from anything else. Jane, how are you dealing with that in the factory space? I mean, what are you doing for your social distancing and that type of thing? What steps are you taking?
You know, I would say we've done an excellent job, and where it begins is guests are not allowed in the facility unless it's by vetted appointment only, so it's not business as usual. The facility is disinfected twice a day. We have disinfected stations set up at different locations throughout the factory, and social distancing, of course, masks, gloves. But I think the most important key is our COO, Doug Dow, has a team meeting with everybody in the facility once a week. And the team meeting is consisting of how are you doing emotionally. This is what's new on the forefront of coronavirus. So if for some reason people aren't watching the news and they're disconnected, we give them an update.
Right.
Hurricane in the way they're going. So there's no lack of communication either way, and the people are engaged. And we're all practicing safe distancing and protocol for COVID-19.
Yeah, it's very different times. I mean, I think after this virus is over, things are going to be very different from what they were before we went into it. A lot of factories, for example, in China and parts of Asia, have had temporary sensors and even facial recognition systems, all sorts of different protection systems before you get into the factory. They've had it there ever since SARS a few years ago. Do you think we're going to start seeing the same thing happening in Europe and the United States?
Yeah, that's a very good question. The normal that we're accustomed to, we're going to go back to. It's going to be a new normal that will evolve and protocol as this virus unfolds. And listening to the CDC, it's a little bit uncertain at this point if there's going to be a second wave, if it's going to be worse. We're assuming the worst case, and we're taking all protocol, and we will put in whatever we need to do to protect our employees. And I think the rest of the industry will do the same.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think you're doing a great job. I think it's a really unfortunate circumstance we're all in, but stay safe, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Always a pleasure.
Okay. That brings us to the end of today's program, and we hope you enjoyed listening to our guests. I'll be back at the same time next week with 4 more guests from the SMT manufacturing industry. And be sure, please, in the meantime, to check out some of the webinars and other panel discussions that we've been doing on the website. Till now, this is Trevor Galbraith saying goodbye and stay safe.